serious parliamentary bills. Bilateral relations and cooperation between the two countries, consolidate political, economic, and social cooperation, and oversee the implementation of the signed agreements and memoranda of understanding. The Commission is also mandated to explore possible new areas of economic, trade, and investment cooperation, including opportunities for bilateral commercial cooperation, joint ventures, and possible collaborative projects presented by the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. That is the President's program, which is a central part of his call in the State of the Nation, that will undertake various actions and interventions, not only to overcome our immediate challenges, but to renew the promise of South Africa. I will now, before I take questions, I'm going to invite politics just to give some color on the elements of his respective area that the President outlined in the State of the Nation address. Rudy will then be followed by Dr. Ramahoba. Thereafter, you are at liberty to then pose questions to any of the three of us to address the various issues that you'd like to ask. Rudy, can I invite you to the podium? Thank you.
Colleagues, members of the press. The cabinet also deal with the youth and employment intervention, so that's areas that we could speak to. I think the youth and employment intervention were probably quite clear and concise in the way the President had provided an update and the program for this year around those particular sets of interventions. If I may just say, I think the presidential youth employment intervention and the presidential employment stimulus has been fairly successful, particularly the school program. I think many of you are familiar with the school program, where we've taken a cohort of young people to be teacher assistants, to support teachers in the classroom with a whole set of different programs, and I think this is something that we'll continue to do going forward for this coming financial year, and this is going to be important. The President's focus on youth, of course, is going to be is also an important area, and as you can see, the specific announcements around the allocations for this coming financial year around the National Skills Fund, introducing a demand-side skilling program, and this is basically what we refer to as a pay performance. It means that we support employers in high-growth sectors like digital and tech, for instance, to train and place people in employment. And then, of course, they're supported by funding, a provision to be able to do that. The key here is placing people, young people in employment. So these are important programs going forward. But I suppose probably the most important for you is the electricity crisis and the over-reform. As I said, the technical aspects, Vincent will deal with some of the other aspects that the President had announced. I think we're making quite a bit of progress, as the President indicated. Some of them relates, for example, to the removing of the the cap for Schedule 2 on licensing requirements. There are no cap at all for licensing required for embedded generation projects. That means any private sector investor could move in that. We've been able to conclude quite significantly so a number of megawatts with burn windows for both 5 and 6. We've been able to work quite hard on reducing the red tape. This is what we're going to focus on for the next few months, so that we are able to get the exemptions, the concurrence, the approvals, authorizations, and permitting. This will be important because we'll be working hand in hand with Dr. Amhoba's SIPS project, the Strategic Infrastructure Project, also declared as strategic infrastructure project. This makes it quite important and significantly reduces the time frame both for general water use licenses and for environmental impact assessments from in excess of 120 days to about 57 days. There are also interventions that speaks to additional power that we've been able to get from the Southern African power pool, which is about 300 megawatts, and then a whole set of other areas. But I thought it's important to perhaps stress the one area, which is the ability of Operation Vulindlela to open up the electricity market space, particularly at the generation level, and this was through that Schedule 2 amendment, which initially started in 2021 when Minister Mantashe promulgated that amendment to the schedule to raise the cap from 1 megawatt to 100 megawatt. Now that has significantly opened up the private sector space. There are now potential 104 projects exceeding 9,000 megawatts, and that's quite important because this is part of many of the interventions to try and reduce the energy supply gap that we do have, and that's the most important thing. I thought that it's quite critical in the way the President had also emphasized the need to ensure that we reduce that supply gap. And as he emphasized again, we are not straying away from any particular plan, neither are we developing a new plan. We are setting the course of implementing the 5 points, 5 actions that he announced in July. We are working quite actively and with a high degree of pace to address some of the impediments, at least from government side, to be able to do that, to be able to address some of those particular sets of interventions that are important. And just a reminder again, what are the 2 key things that we're looking at, right? If one summarizes the 5 points in the action plan. There are 2 key things. One is to improve plant performance for Eskom, and the second is to ensure that we get enough new megawatts onto the grid as quickly as possible. So those are the 2 key, if I should summarize it, those are the 2 key things that are going to be quite critical for us to be able to do. Plant performance is quite important. And here I think it's quite critical for us to say as government, we are not intending to replace or to interfere in the operational or in the governance or in the managerial responsibility of Eskom. Eskom is an entity in its own right. Its shareholder is DPE, and I think that's quite important to emphasize it. But what we are doing is saying to Eskom, what is it that we can do as government to support you in implementing your recovery generation plan? And that's fundamental. So for instance, you may have heard, of course, Andre and many of the other ourselves also indicate that there's been problems around procurement of spare parts, procurement directly from original equipment manufacturers, issues around skills, issues around a whole sets of regulatory issues that we can assist, for example, in speeding that for Eskom. That's precisely what we've been doing. That's precisely what we're going to do in the future so that it can focus on its plant performance. It can fix the plants. It can ensure that they stay as they maintain, that they do not give us the kind of partial or low losses that has been there. So the idea is to support Eskom in ensuring that it turnarounds its plants as a matter of urgency and provide all the support that we can give, including reducing or even eliminating the red tape with respect to anything that Eskom requires. So that's quite important for us to be able to consider. The second part, which relates to additional megawatts, and this again is what is in our control and within the departments that are there. And this is going to be quite important for us, because even if we do increase the plant performance of Eskom, Eskom will still require the kind of space for it to run longer-term maintenance. It would have to take into consideration some of the indications that are in the IRP around decommissioning. No matter what, we are going to require to put on more megawatts on the grid. And this is through a whole set of different interventions, as indicated in the IRP, that is being upgraded by the DMRE. For now, the quickest way, so for us, what's important, and we emphasize this, the quickest way to get more megawatts onto the grid is to focus on PVs, to focus on wind, is to focus on battery storage. It doesn't preclude, and I think this is important, the emphasis of other forms of technology to be able to ensure that that is supported. Now, gas, for example, remains a part of our policy mix. Dr. Ramokgopa will be speaking about some of the interventions in energy around gas, particularly how we unblock, for example, the 3 gigawatt gas project by Eskom. In the IRP 2019, there's another 3 gigawatt of gas. Again, we have to ensure that although we've received concurrence from NERSA and approval from the Minister DMRE, that RFP is issued, because that's quite critical also to ensure that we get more megawatts on the grid. But I want to emphasize that the quickest way is, again, through balancing PV and wind and getting those megawatts onto the grid as quickly as possible. So we've set up a whole set of different interventions to support that, and that's going to be quite critical. You would have noticed that there was some important and fundamental intervention that the President announced, and that is rooftop solar PV, right? And that's quite important, because we've been talking about that for many months and years. And so finally, we have now developed we've already finalized a net billing framework. But what is more important, to incentivize households to move off from the grid or partially move off from the grid, is rooftop solar. And there are global cases, where we've seen this happen, and quite successfully so. Vietnam, a case in point, many other countries. This is precisely how we're able to what we are intending to do is to get as many households off the grid or partially off the grid by providing them a clear framework, supporting the municipalities in developing that clear framework, the distribution network of Eskom to support that framework. And as you can see, we expect the Minister of Finance in its budget speech to make quite clear and precise announcements as to what sort of financial incentives that would incur. And already I think you've got a sense of what the President had indicated, which is potentially a supporting mechanism through the tax system, look at, for example, the bounce back scheme that was there for SMMEs and how one could repurpose that, for instance, to support small businesses to get off the grid. They are the hardest impacted on when they ease when they ease load shedding. So there's a whole set of interventions that we've spoken about. Now you may ask, well, some of these interventions sounds like they're really 12, 24 months away. And for us, it's going to be quite critical to talk about what we can do immediately. So many people don't agree with us, and I think it's quite important to emphasize this. The quickest way to try and ensure that we mitigate load shedding is to burn diesel. There is no other option in a state where there's a constrained grid environment. We have worked with between Eskom, and we facilitated the conversations between Eskom and Treasury to be able to resolve this matter. Eskom has gotten approval from National Treasury to purchase diesel for the remaining months of the year to ensure that there's no shortfall, and it's able to burn the open cycle gas turbines to be able to alleviate higher stages of load shedding. That is going to be important. That will be an important area for us going forward. We expect Eskom in its new financial year to allocate additional money to ensure that it doesn't midway through the year run short of diesel to be able to do that. The second part, which is quite important also for immediate emergency procurement, is precisely that, which is referred to as a standard offer purchase and emergency power procurement. And Eskom will go to the market in the next few days. Firstly, it would, through a standard offer purchase, which is more or less what was around many years ago, which is a short-term power purchase agreements. These are firms, large industrial users, who, as its byproduct, it is energy, and therefore they can immediately dispatch that onto the grid. Paper mills, for example, Sapi Mondi, Sasol, for example. This is important because once you have a standard offer is basically saying, here's the kilowatt price, it is an X amount, we prepare to purchase from you an X amount, purchase from you whatever energy you have that we can dispatch immediately onto the grid for a set price. And that's quite critical, so it opens up the market space for those who can dispatch immediately, because that's important. The difference here is not 6 months, not 3 months, it's not 12 months, is what is immediately available. But it also allows Eskom to go onto an emergency procurement, and that's going to be quite critical for us going forward. So it's just a bit more added onto this, Vincent. Maybe just one more thing on the other OV stuff, if you don't mind, right? Right, because I thought I'll spend a bit more time on energy. The NECOM Secretariat is, we're working quite hard on unblocking and dealing with many of these aspects. It is really hands-on, granular, focusing on what's the next steps and how we're going to fix this and ensure that this does happen. So I thought that's important. But I think that sometimes we tend to miss the other structural reforms that are quite critical, and Dr. Ramokgopa will talk to some of them also in his inputs. But logistics, for example, is quite an important area. You would recall that one of the key things on there was third-party access and really allowing private sector to bid for particular slots. We think this is going to be important. We're working with Transnet to ensure that we deal with some of the inadequacy in the last bid that was put out for third-party access. You would have noticed that Transnet has also taken quite a proactive stance in putting out a call for requests for information, or as it would be, for the NatCore line. The NatCore line is, of course, our busiest line. And so they have recommended a private sector participation by concessioning the line over the next 20 years. I think it's an important step. We just need to ensure that we coordinate exactly how we think and see through an end state for Transnet that is going to be important, that promotes efficiency, that ensures that the SOE is in the center of it, and that allows for private sector participation. At the end of the day, if we are not able to get our goods to port, and of course from port to its destination, we become very uncompetitive. That's the one edge that we have, and we think we need to focus on. There are a number of other work that we are doing, for example, on skills and visa. You would have seen the President announces the visa reform program that is now going to be implemented by the Department of Home Affairs. This has been quite an important area that has been supported by Mr. Mavuso Msimang, who was the former Director General of the Department of Home Affairs in the mid-90s. He has driven those recommendations will be cascaded into either regulations or policy documents. That's important to try and ensure that our visa system does evolve into something that is much more competitive, and we are able to attract the relevant and right skills that are short in our country. Your President has also made some announcements on hemp and cannabis, and I think this is an important area, again, in opening up the market space and allowing for black small-scale agricultural farmers in the hemp and cannabis sector. We need to align the legislative parameters both at the Department of Health and at the rural development around ensuring that we can open up that market space. President had also earlier made a point around the structural reform around ensuring that we get the cadastral system up and running in South Africa. Massive potential for investment in mining. State-of-the-art, off-the-shelf, very important, off-the-shelf cadastral system that will be implemented, and the commitments from DMR to be able to ensure that that does happen. There are other reforms on water, more successful reforms that we've been able to complete. The one final area is just the approval of the National Water Resource and Infrastructure Act. This is quite critical around pricing for bulk water and the ability for us to be able to coordinate our water resources much more effectively and more efficiently going forward. So, Vincent, I hope that covers to some degree. Sorry? 101. Oh, yes, of course. Yes, of course. So, You would have also seen that, sorry Vincent, I just remind me on the 10111. You'd have seen that when we announced the Operation Vulindlela and the structural reform process, most of it was focusing on the network sectors. And when President announces towards October 2020, you would have focused on that. We have now had a conversation with the Minister of Police in that we had offered our methodology and approach to try and address some of the more fundamental challenges, perhaps in the security services, and one of that was 10111, making the call center work. Colleagues would remember that the call center system, and this is why we thought is very important, we are global leaders in global business services and call centers. 2 years in a row as the lead destination, South Africa. We've worked quite hard in partnering with the private sector. The private sector has been quite supportive during COVID in setting up call centers both for the UIF and for the COVID response. And we felt that would be important to perhaps see whether we're able to partner with the private sector in improving the efficiency and ensuring that the 10111 call center is improved. We're going to work with SABC around this. We're quite excited if we can, fix that and ensure that we address some of those, challenges around that. We think it creates a better step for us to be able to look at other areas as well. And so, of course, the OV methodology is not ours. It's not the OV team. It's the methodology that we want to inculcate in trying to problem solve and fix issues as speedily as possible. And you want to see that kind of methodology inculcated across government. So thanks, Vincent, for that.
Thank you very much, Vincent, and good morning to everyone. As directed by Vincent, I'm going to give a much more elaborate picture of the infrastructure space. Of course, it has two dimensions. One is that it's an elaboration on what the President would have shared in the SONA, but also a bit of reflection on the kind of progress that we have made from the SONA 2022. So just to start with, I think the climate-induced fate of our people has received widespread coverage. So we have seen that many communities are cut off from opportunities. Kids can't access schools as a result of major floods that have happened in large parts of the country, especially in the areas of the Eastern Cape, KZN, and also Gauteng. And that has a direct implication on the infrastructure, and of course, part of it is largely because of inadequate infrastructure to accommodate the kind of climatic changes that we are experiencing. And in line with that, the President had announced in the last SONA, so the 2022, that we are committing significant amount of resources to build rural bridges in the rural hinterlands of our country, what we call Bailey bridges. So these are meant to provide all-weather access to communities in those far-flung areas. We know that a significant proportion of communities in these parts of our country, they have to cross water bodies to access economic opportunities, social amenities, and just go about their lives. So the President had committed to construction of 95 bridges in the next medium-term period, over a period of 3 years. And just a bit of where we are now. So in the current financial year, we will be in a position to conclude about 48 of these bridges. And the reason why there's been a delay in the rollout of these bridges is because the in-year allocation was only received late in the financial year. But we are more than confident that we will be able to catch up in the next financial years. Where are these bridges? The 48 that I'm referring to. The 24 are already completed or in advanced stages of completion in the KZN province. And why is the concentration of these bridges in KZN? It was in large part to ameliorate, if you like, communities' experiences as a result of the floods. So there had to be a concentration in the KZN. And then we are expanding the next 24, so between now and the end of the financial year, construction has already started. So in largely 2 provinces, and this is going to be the Eastern Cape and Limpopo. So the next question to be asked, why is it that we are not necessarily prioritizing other provinces? Is because of the topographic conditions in these areas of KZN, Limpopo, and the Eastern Cape. And that's why there's a large concentration of initial rollout of these bridges in the 3 provinces, and we have already given an indication that the next set of 95 bridges, of course, will be spread across the country, but I must emphasize that a greater share of those 95 bridges going forward is still going to be in those 3 provinces. So we have now received fiscal support for the next 3 years of 3.7 billion rands to roll out these bridges. And the uniqueness of these bridges is that it's the South African National Defence Force that is constructing these bridges. And of course, we draw from the catchment areas of those bridges for us to be able to draw the labor that is required to support the South African National Defence Force. And I think that a significant highlight of this program is the fact that it's the state that essentially is constructing these bridges going forward. So the 3.7 billion is going to help us in the next 3 years, on average 95 bridges per annum to be rolled out. And then the other issue that is afflicting rural communities is the state of rural roads. And just to give you a net picture of the South African road infrastructure, is that we've got 780,000 kilometers of proclaimed roads. And of that 780,000 kilometers of proclaimed roads, only 20% of that is surfaced. When I say surface, there's a form of what you call tar, bitumen emulsion, or bitumen, concrete surface, or a brick surface. So 80% of our roads are gravel roads. So I think it's an important picture that you must have. And also that SANRAL is responsible for about 3% of the total network of the roads. So you can see that a great majority of these roads are sitting with provincial governments and local authorities. So I thought that that picture is important. So in the 2022 SONA, the President indicated that we will be rolling out about surfacing 685 kilometers of rural roads. And these rural roads are going to benefit from a unique design, in that the kind of design that we'll be using the local material that is essentially sourced from the local area. And then it will be using block paving. Why do you use block paving? Because you want to remove machinery and allow for local people to participate in the rollout of that road. So we have completed the standardization of the designs of those roads, so that when I talk about rural roads, when anyone in government talks about rural roads, we know what is the standard quality and also the participation of local communities, and also the sourcing of local materials, so that there's an appreciation that as we resolve the infrastructure problem, we're also resolving the unemployment problem, and also the skills issue. What have we done in relation to the 685 promise? Now, as I speak to you, there's 196 kilometers of those roads that are under construction, and 36 kilometers of those have been completed. So we are on course to meet the 685 kilometers of roads that the President had promised. And then, of course, there are provinces that lend themselves to benefit from this kind of infrastructure rollout. One, because of their rural nature, and also because of the average share of the rural roads as a total of the roads that they have in that province. For an example, the majority of the roads in Gauteng are surfaced. The majority of the roads in the Western Cape are surfaced relative to what other provinces are experiencing. I think it's an important qualification. So again, KwaZulu-Natal, Eastern Cape, Limpopo, the Northwest, and Mpumalanga are going to benefit disproportionately from the rollout of these rural roads. And like I said, we have completed the standard designs. And then the other area, so the President in SONA 2022 emphasized that from an infrastructure point of view, we'll be focusing on energy. My colleague Rudy has expanded on that, and then emphasized that we'll focus on roads. I've just shared with you roads, of course, bridges are in that total family of roads because it's a structure that is meant to convey traffic, the same as roads do. And then the third area is that of water. So the major announcement that the President had made in the 2022 SONA was Umzimvubu, which is a water scheme, a conjunctive scheme that was announced many years ago, conceptualized even pre-democracy, to provide, if you like, reliable, quality, potable water, and also water for irrigation and industrial support in the large parts of the areas of the Eastern Cape. And then the President did indicate that, of course, we had already started with the early works, and now when we start with the next financial year, the beginning of April, we'll be starting with the construction of the Ntabalanga Dam. There are two dams that makes up the conjunctive scheme, is the big Ntabalanga Dam and also the Lalini Dam. So, of course, we have received fiscal support to the tune of about 8 billion rands. So we are starting with the rollout of the Ntabalanga Dam, and then that will be followed by the Lalini Dam. And of course, like I said, the early works had already started to the tune of about 115 million rands. And the early works, I'm talking about roads because you need access for yellow plants to reach the bottom of the valley for us to construct the road. And the promise is that, of course, Vincent will be inviting you to go to many of these sites so that you have an appreciation of what we are talking about. So to be able to get yellow plants, concrete to construct the dam and the steel, you need roads to take you there. So we've already started with what we call the early works in addressing that problem. And then it is important that we also share with you the kind of progress that we have made to date in total on the infrastructure front. Because infrastructure is not just energy, roads, and water. There's also issues of school infrastructure. There's issues around social housing or human settlements in general. So we have what we call strategic integrated projects that are meant to accelerate the delivery of this infrastructure. So we had made a promise that there's to the tune of about 340 billion rands of these projects that had to be rolled out. So now as I stand before you is that 232 billion rands of those projects are in construction. And these include, amongst others, the GP's Town social housing project, the National Route 1, Section 17, the upgrading of the Ventersberg to Kroonstad upgrade, and also the development of what we call small harbors. So really these are intervention to resuscitate the small harbors to provide both an economic and social intervention in those spaces that are benefiting from this. And the 232 billion rands of these projects that I'm talking about are in the areas of water, sanitation, energy, transportation, digital infrastructure, agriculture and agro-processing, and like I said, human settlements. So there's a long list of these projects, and of course, at your pleasure, we will be able to share with you. But what is the core message? The core message is that the promise that we had made in relation to progressing infrastructure project with speed to conclusion is something that is taking root. And I think one of the areas that will rectify on ourselves is to make sure that we take you to this construction site so that there's a greater level of appreciation on the kind of progress that is being made. And then the other commitment that the President had made was to galvanize private sector participation in the rollout of infrastructure. I think there's an appreciation that for us to be able to achieve levels of investments in the South African economy to be at 30% of GDP, a significant proportion of the weight of that commitment has to be carried out by the private sector. So the state really must galvanize private sector participation, achieve crowding effect. And the President had indicated that these projects that are private sector sponsored to the tune of about 133 billion rands, requiring an injection or fiscal support or public sector support of 1.8 billion rands. And we are finalizing that mechanism. But a lot of these private sector projects, as we speak, they're already getting into the next phases. So all we are doing is to help to support the acceleration of future phases so that the certainty with regards to government's commitment to provide for bulk infrastructure support in the form of energy, water, and roads. And the point I'm making is that we are proceeding with speed on that. I thought it will be important also just to say that in the totality of these projects that we are offering, to just give you feedback in relation to the major SANRAL projects. You remember that there were about 6 projects that are sponsored by, or rather 5 projects that are SANRAL sponsored, which were halted, and then Minister Mbalula then assigned, and the SANRAL board, of course, assigned the DBS Development Bank of South Africa to help in the restarting of the procurement evaluation process so that we get these projects up and running. So I'm happy to say that as we speak now, 4 of these 5 SANRAL projects have been awarded. The one that has not been awarded is the one that has to do with the technologies that supports, if you like, the e-tolls, the Gauteng Freeway Improvement Project. You remember that the Minister of Finance did announce in the medium-term budget policy statement that there has been a resolution on that the state will carry the responsibility of rolling out or financing GFIP, but also meeting the obligations that are associated with the rollout of GFIP. And there's a split between national government and the Gauteng provincial government. So that project will be attended to within the totality of that intervention. So the 4 projects have to do with the entry Ashburton interchange in KwaZulu-Natal to the tune of the 2.4 billion rand, the Mthentu Bridge on the N2 Wild Coast to the tune of 4 billion rands, the rehabilitation of the R56 Matatiele in the Eastern Cape to the tune of 1.23 billion rands, and also the N2 entry Ibiklute interchange in KwaZulu-Natal to the tune of 5.2 billion rands. You can see that there's a concentration of these projects on the entry, especially between Maritzburg and Durban, and really is to widen, if you like, the capacity of the road so that we are able to facilitate the movement of goods to port. As we all know that Durban is one of the biggest ports on the continent. And then there's a point that my colleague Rudy referred to earlier on in relation to some of the demand side interventions on the energy side. So Rudy did competently explain what are the kind of interventions we are making. But the one that I want to lift that is within our domain is that of repurposing government facilities to benefit from renewable energy and battery storage intervention. So we have computed that, of course, we are using up to 320 megawatts. That is the all of government at the national level. And this is before we go to provincial and local authority level. So we'll be going out to market before the end of March for the private sector to make investments in that space to repurpose these buildings. And I think at the conclusion of that, we'll be able to relieve, if you like, the demand side, reduce it by 320 megawatts. It's going to help, of course, to balance that equation or in relation to the generation supply side, as Rudy has indicated, and the demand side. So that's the first benefit. The second benefit is that it relieves government of the responsibility to make payments in relation to energy, which is a significant amount of resources that we are spending. And that money can then be redirected to other social needs in government. And the third one is that in the course of retrofitting this, we are able to prepare communities, businesses owned by women, youth, and the like, to benefit from this renewable energy revolution. So Rudy spoke about the rooftop, designing an instrument to support, if you like, rooftop solutions for households. And we can see that once we succeed in developing that instrument and bring it on board, there's a significant amount of see-through the requirement with regards to rooftop technology is going to require that we build the necessary skills and capacity to roll out that kind of infrastructure. So we'll be using this program as part of the interventions to make sure that we are able to accelerate, if you like, skills for the future for us to be able to benefit from renewable technologies. And then in conclusion, we have accepted that, as Rudy has indicated, there are structural challenges in government that undermine the ability of the state to deliver on projects, that undermine our ability to spend on the infrastructure allocation. And chief amongst those have to do with the quality of the skills that we have. So we have hemorrhaged significant skills in the public sector, both the financial and engineering technical skills, and we need to rebuild those skills. And that undermines our ability to plan, to have good quality projects, to package projects to benefit from the debt capital market. And we are placing an inordinate amount of burden on the fiscus, even placing before the fiscus for possible financing consideration, projects that can be financed through the debt capital markets. And the only reason why we can't go that route of the debt capital market is because of the quality of the project, the manner in which they've been packaged. So what are we doing in this regard? So President Ramaphosa has indicated that the 600 million that has been given to Infrastructure South Africa to support, if you like, poor municipalities and provinces that don't have this capacity to prepare projects accordingly, to package them so that they are ready for implementation. Part of the problem is that a lot of projects attract fiscal support, but once they get to attract that fiscal support, you find that the rezoning has not happened. So there is a project in a school in Province X has been funded to improve the infrastructure or build a new school. But you find that there's no zoning by the local municipality for that area to be a school, for a school to be constructed. Or there's no municipal grid connection to support the water and energy. So it's important that we package these projects so that when we go out and say projects are ready for fiscal support, this project indeed can be financed and we are able to go out on tender immediately. So that's the one on project preparation. The other one is on execution. So yes, the project has got all this licensing, has got the planning in place, but the state has no capacity to execute or evaluate competently, if you like, the submissions from the private sector. And the state is not able to accelerate delivery. You find that projects take over 3 financial years to be completed, even if they've got sufficient financing to be completed in one single financial year. So all we are doing is to introduce mechanisms in the state so that there's a project management offices that they aggregate the skills that we have in the public sector and also drawing additional skills from the private sector to help us to ramp up, if you like, delivery, so that we undermine the hemorrhaging of skills that have taken place over a period of time, and simultaneously build a new layer of skills that once the private sector gets to leave the space, the state has developed sufficient capacity internally to be able to discharge and prosecute the amount of projects that are before us, and we're able to turn South Africa into a major construction site there. Thanks, Vincent.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Dr. Ramaphosa, Mr. Rudy Dix, for that very detailed outline in unpacking some of the announcements that the President made. So, colleagues, we'll open the floor to questions now. We have colleagues joining us via Zoom. They can either type their questions and Kujo will assist in relaying those questions to us, or they can be unmuted and raise those questions. We still have Rudy here and Dr. Ramaphosa if there are any questions for them, and I'll also be available to respond. Heidi?
It's Heidi Jacques from ENCA. I just have one question.
Only one?
Yes. When will the Minister of Electricity be appointed? Thank you.
Okay.
Well, my name is Sintebu. I'm with the SABC. I've seen here that Dr. Ramokgopa said they planning to have around 320 megawatts that would be on government buildings or for provinces. When are we likely going to have this 320 megawatts, which simply means all government departments and provincial government departments will be off the national grid? Is this what you're contemplating? And when is this likely going to happen? And maybe to Rudi, I've seen here that you're saying that the presidential youth employment and government's bid to create jobs for young people, it seems to be on course. But looking at the statistics that almost over 60% of young people are unemployed in South Africa, how then do you align that with this push to have, to say young people seem to be benefiting out of this presidential youth? And then again on the electricity and your intervention at Eskom, I heard that you said you're not going to dictate or to interfere with what Eskom is doing. But some people, especially those who are working at Eskom, are saying, in fact, it's not a problem. There's no problem at Eskom. But the problem is that there are some criminal elements who are deliberately providing a substandard coal, and those substandard coal ultimately then damage the machines there, and ultimately we end up with breakdowns. What are strategic intervention as opposed to be maybe skirting around issues? What are your immediate intervention and interventions that will ultimately yield results to stop that, as opposed to seem to be skirting around issues and ultimately having even to appoint the Minister of Electricity? That's my submission.
Okay, thank you, Ndebu. I'm going to take maybe, let's say, 2 or 3 more from the Zoom platform. Kujo, are we winning?
We have a question from Brian Sukoto from the Citizen. His question says, when is the president likely to announce a cabinet reshuffle? What is the presidency response to a comment by Energy and Mineral Resources Minister that the soon-to-be appointed electricity minister will serve as a project manager, a temporary measure? And then we have a second question from Tama Khan from Business Day. And she asks, can you provide more detail about Eskom's plan to procure emergency short-term power from industry? How much power do you hope to procure? What will you pay? Can you set out the regulatory steps that are required to make this happen? And her second question is, the declaration of the state of disaster for electricity requires regulations or directives to bring government's plans in this regard into effect. Can you give us some of the specifics? What exactly does government intend to do with the powers in terms of the state of disaster? And when will we see the detailed regulations to bring these interventions into effect?
Okay, let's take one more from the Zoom platform.
From Jason Flicks from News 24 asks, has the president expressed any view on the disruption by the EFF at the sauna? Did the president fear for his life when the stage was stormed? And his second question is, by when can we expect an announcement on the cabinet reshuffle, given the number of vacancies and changes that need to be made to cabinet?
Okay, great. So what we're going to do, we're going to start with Dr. Ramokgopa, and thereafter Rudi will follow, and I will then wrap up the last round of those questions. So, Doc?
Thank you very much for the questions. I think the more direct one is what Ndebu had raised, and that relates to the 300 megawatts demand-side intervention that relates to the retrofitting of government buildings. Yes, we have done a computation, and I said, I'm emphasizing the 320 megawatts only at the national level. So we have not done computation and modeling for the provincial and local authorities, because at that level, the municipalities must opt into the program, and provinces must opt into the program, because they are unique constitutional entities. But we think that within the umbrella of the interventions that we are making, that are very bold and aggressive, in making interventions on the demand side, they are likely going to come on board. So the point, the 320 table refers to national government facilities. You are asking when is this going to start? So the first tranche is ready, and this has to do with correctional centers in the country. So they will have finalized the computation, the modeling. So we'll be going out, like I said, before the end of March into the market. But we are not going to wait for other centers or facilities to come on board, such as the priority will be given to hospitals, will be given to water infrastructure. I'm sure you know the situation here in Gauteng in particular, and I assume it's in many parts of the country. The situation, the water situation in relation to the ability of rainwater to deliver reliable water supply to communities here has to do with the interruption in the energy supply. So it's very little to do with the availability of water. So that those are the interventions that are going to receive a priority, and also the courts are going to receive a priority. But to answer your question, when are we starting? I'm saying before the end of March. We're starting with the correctional centers as we build, if you like, the pipeline of these projects to come on board. The only reason why those ones are not able to go out now is because the technical teams are doing computations. Because when we invite the market players, we want to be sure of our story, of what is it that can be a relief on the demand side, and not just rely on private sector to say to us, this is what is possible. Thanks, Ruby.
I suppose, Josienzo, it would probably be wise for us to look at the entire state sector. And I think that's useful also from a SOE point of view, right? That we need to think about how we do that. But the biggest savings we'll get for demand side is interventions from the private sector. And that's the most important thing that we can appeal to the private sector about. So you can see we have that in our control. But if we are able to provide the right sort of incentives, and I think Jose is looking at that, and a whole set of other things that the private sector is able to, and households are able to reduce their demand, that would be also useful. And Tebo, just on you're right. I mean, you recall the debate that we've always had between what the role of the private sector is and the state sector in employment. The state sector is here intended to support. When we designed that program for youth and for the presidential employment stimulus, it was during the time when we lost 2 million jobs. And so, of course, the state had to intervene. And so, of course, we designed those particular sets of programs. And lo and behold, they've been quite successful in both implementation and on impact. Impact, you've seen some of the data that's come through. It's, of course, in the bigger scheme of things, when you talk about an unemployment rate of about 30%, and you talk about 2 percentage points decline in unemployment, you may say, but, we're still in 30%. But 2 percentage points decline, which translates into 1.5 million people employed in 1 year. We've never seen that kind of level of employment in a very, very long time. And I think that's the important thing. What we require, and this is what we're doing as part of my team, is to partner quite closely with the private sector, a whole set of job interventions. It can only work. There's no other way, So we will be able to do and allocate resources to continue and support the presidential employment stimulus and the presidential youth employment stimulus, including the support for the pathway manager. The sayouth.mobi platform, which now has over 3 million young people on the platform. It's the largest platform around. What we need, of course, is not only to have people register on the platform, but to place them into employment or earning opportunities. And that for us is going to be the fundamental task, working together with the private sector on this one, right? So I do think that, in the bigger schemes of the big unemployment situation, you are right. But I think we're seeing progress, we're seeing data moving in the right direction, right, in terms of impact. We need that partnership with the private sector, that skills-driven demand skills intervention is a classic partnership with the private sector, where we think in the growth sectors like digital and tech, or agriculture, for example, or horses sectors around renewable, for example, and green hydrogen. These are potential sectors that will have huge and important opportunities for employment for young people. And so we need to ready people to be able to move into them and not wait for these sectors to be around, but we need to do that going forward. You're right, I didn't speak about the criminal element, and partly so because it's quite a complex story, and I don't think we should shy away from it. But I know that Eskom and the Minister of DPE and the CEO, the outgoing CEO, has been quite vociferous around the fact that, coal quality, and the fact that, and let's just kill this, because I think many people say, why are we exporting coal? It's not about the, exports of coal. And we've got coal for 250 years. It's about, the quality of coal, of power stations that have been designed for a set type of quality. And then, of course, there's direct sabotage, where the quality of coal is such that there's a layer of coal, and this is what we've seen. There are rocks or poor quality coal, and then there's coal dumped on top. And so what you have is where you initially had a conveyor belt from a mine moving in. You have now hundreds of trucks dumping coal onto the coal pile, and of course it goes into the mill. Before the mill, it's crushed, and you're crushing rocks, and it goes into the mill. The mill is not designed for rocks, sand, or any other kind of thing. It's designed for the quality, which is the calorific value of that particular set of coal that's there. And of course, once the mill is destroyed, it destroys the tube and the boiler, for example, where the tubes are, and this is the reality of it. But the fact is that our coal power fire stations are old, right? And they do require a different set of maintenance regimes. If you don't take them off regularly, and if you don't do the maintenance regimes that are required, you are going to have much greater breakdown. So other than the quality of coal, theft of spare parts, theft of fuel oil, theft of diesel, sabotage, for example, during the course of last year at Duva, you had to walk 500 meters to get to, underground cables, that were cut and disconnected for the water treatment plant. What does that mean? It doesn't mean one unit, it means the entire plant is off until you connect those cables. That's on the plant, right? Not on the outskirts of the plant. So you're right, and I think this is quite important. What we have done is to establish a multidisciplinary team, right? The SABC has allocated a team of people, professional people that are now working on this. I know, for instance, that many of them have visited some of the key power stations where there have been allegations of significant theft, sabotage, and corruption. And Tutuka is a good example. The president always uses that as a good example, where people have gone to Duva, gone to Majuba, gone to other power stations to be able to do that. I think what we have seen is some quite significant and important arrests around coal quality and illegal coal yards and those who don't have licenses. What we need to focus on, I think, in the next few months is ensuring that spare parts and maintenance parts, fuel oil, and that kind of internal corruption and theft is also nipped in the bud. And I think that requires an internal process, working with Eskom quite closely to be able to do that. So you're right. It is a combination. It's not only theft, although theft and corruption plays an important role. Our plants are old, and we require space for it to be taken off for longer maintenance and having a proper maintenance philosophy. You can't cut corners. That's the point about it. Let me use another example. I mean, we were able to help out on addressing this. Kusili, our new plant, right? You would have known that Unit 1, 2, and 3, one collapsed towards the end of November. And in the smokestack, right, there are three flues. There are the steel drums that pump from the different units. And the Unit 1 had a high level of slurry, which is the coal ash which built up. And of course, it got so heavy that it collapsed the flue duct onto the other two flue ducts. Now, what caused that? That was caused because of poor design flaws, because of potential corruption that was there, in the design of the plant itself. You know that there's been significant investigations, Some people that were part of the building the plant have paid admission of guilt, and some of the money has been recovered. But this is precisely where we sit with. Now, if you think about 3 units of Kosilia, new plant, down and out, that's 2 stages of load shedding. That's 2,100 megawatts, right? And so, of course, what we need to do is to be able to ensure that we assist as far as possible to do the temporary ducts that are required, to see what is it that we require to be able to support them to get that built as quickly as possible. So we have those 2 stages of load shedding out of the way. There's, of course, Unit 5, and that was in the contractor's hands where there was a massive fire. We think, again, that if we are able to support Eskom in getting that back into commercial operation, or into commercial operation, not back, into commercial operation by August, September. Again, Eskom must tell us, what do you need from government for us to be able to support that? Can we provide, some aspects around exemptions if that is required on different areas? But you understand the dynamic. It's a very difficult dynamic, and we have a team in place. I think that team is led by the SABC. It is a multidisciplinary team, and they are cracking this to be able to address some of the more fundamental stuff around that. I think Brian's point around Eskom, around the emergency, it's about 1,400 megawatts of immediately dispatchable energy that we're hoping to obtain as quickly as possible. In terms of the timeline, we'd expected Eskom board to approve that already by this weekend, right? So we will follow up on them, because what we needed, we've already got all the permits. We've got the exemptions, we've got the approval in terms of the new gen regs from the Minister of DMRE. Already this is covered in the tariff, because NERSA had indicated that the standard offer and the emergency procurement is covered in the tariff. It is now in Eskom's hands to implement it and to go to the market space as quickly as possible. They require internal, and as you can see, we've spoken to them about ensuring that it happens quite quickly through an emergency investment committee meeting, an emergency board meeting. Tomorrow we're back on them to say, has this gone out? We want to know where this is happening, and we're able to provide an update. In terms of our timeline, it was supposed to have happened and approved on the 10th of February. So, what they're paying, I cannot say for now until the Eskom board announces that. So again, those are sensitive market information, because you're going out to a market space and you're basically saying, I'm prepared to take immediately dispatchable electrons, and I'm going to pay an X value for it. So allow Eskom to announce it. Once that is announced, I think the market's already waiting. They've been engaging with different marketplaces who are able to provide that as quickly as possible. So I think that covers my areas.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. I'm going to address a few questions that were directed towards my direction. The first one, in no particular order, was on the timelines around the appointment of the Minister of Electricity, as well as the reshuffle. The President appreciates the urgency in which he needs to finalize the cabinet appointments. The President appreciates the urgency in which he needs to finalize the appointment of the Minister of Electricity with respect to the kind of crisis that we are facing. So in time, fairly soon, those announcements will be made. So if we can just be a little bit patient, the President is applying his mind, and as I've said, fully appreciates the magnitude of the crisis on the electricity side, but also the urgency with respect to finalizing the makeup of his cabinet team. With respect to, and maybe while on the electricity ministry, let me try and just deal with this issue more broadly, so that there's better appreciation of what the President is trying to do here. And I'm also just going to deal with some of the criticism that has been leveled at the President following his SONA address. The long and short of it is that South Africa is facing an enormous crisis which threatens both economic and social stability. In consultations with business, labor, community organizations, interfaith leaders, and the Presidential Coordinating Council, President Ramaphosa was being urged to take bold measures that will effectively deal with the current electricity crisis. Some of those calls were very specific to the declaration of the state of disaster. And they came particularly from Premier Winde of the Western Cape and the Executive Mayor of Cape Town, Mr. Gideon Hill-Lewis, who are both senior DA leaders. The President responded in a bold manner, both in terms of capacity to resolve the crisis. You've heard some of the details from Rudi. And in this particular case, it's through the creation of a dedicated Ministry of Electricity in the Presidency that will work with the National Energy Committee, NECOM. And the President also then provided the appropriate enablement through the declaration of the state of disaster. The impact of power outages on food security, water supply, livelihoods, people's health, and the economy requires that all of us as South Africans will rally behind the efforts that are underway. We must also emphasize that this is not the time for finger-pointing or politically motivated court actions or lawfare. This is the time to look past our ideological and political differences, and it's the time to work together in the interest of our nation, in the interest of growing the economy and sustaining livelihoods. The President does expect that even those that harbor reservations about the approach that he has taken are expected to join in and put shoulder to wheel, because ultimately we're all working towards the same goal. There have been concerns about possible corruption and claims of looting, etc., judging from some unfortunate previous experiences. We must emphasize that with respect to concerns of abuse and corruption around the state of disaster, President Ramaphosa announced measures to deal with any form of abuse. Over and above, the Auditor General keeping a close eye on various processes as they roll out, the President expects law enforcement agencies to be vigilant and to act with speed in dealing with those who will seek to take advantage of the situation. There was a question with respect to the EFF disruption and whether the President feared for his life. The disruptive conduct of members of Parliament from the economic freedom fighters is a matter for Parliament to address through its rules and processes. President Ramaphosa retained his composure throughout the evening, as you all saw. The energetic and focused manner in which he delivered his State of the Nation address showed a president that remains resolute on the task of resolving the myriad of challenges facing the country, and importantly, who remains accountable to the nation about the work of his administration. The disruptive scenes led by the EFF in Parliament have become an unfortunate and disturbing permanent feature of the SONA and other parliamentary activities, such as the President's budget vote speech. Out of 400 members of Parliament, only 44 partake in a behavior that is unbecoming of lawmakers, in conduct that is harmful to the image of the country, and in violation of the rights of the majority of voters who did not vote for these 44, and prefers not to witness any of the troubling scenes that precede the President's address. I think I've covered all of those questions, unless there's a question I may have omitted. Kujo, I think I've covered all of them. Have I? Yes, I have. Okay.
There are more questions though.
There are more questions though. Dr. Ramagopa is still here. Rudi is still here. We'll take those questions from the Zoom platform.
From Lowen Prince from Netwerk 24 says, are there any ideas at the stage who's being considered to be appointed as the new Minister of Electricity? there seems to be a bit of confusion about the president being involved in an emergency landing last week as he flew down to Cape Town for the sauna, as the SANDF confirmed it. There are reports also this morning that the presidential jet was also damaged after landing at Cape Town International Airport. Was the president involved in an emergency landing, and is the presidential jet damaged? And there's a question from Amanda Kosa from Sunday Times. She asks, please elaborate what exactly the Minister of Electricity will be responsible for, and will the office be done away with once the electricity crisis has been resolved? Is this not a vote of no confidence in the ministers, Gwede Mantashe and Pravin Gordhan? And then Brian Sokoto is asking a follow-up question on comment on the electricity minister being regarded as a project manager.
Okay. Is that it?
Yes, that's it.
Okay. So maybe let's start with the Minister of Electricity. No, we're not going to have a public brainstorm on who the potential candidates are, but we appreciate the spirit of the question. What the president has said is that he's adopting a project management approach with this role. Whether you then refer to the minister or the yet to be appointed or the soon to be appointed Minister of Electricity as a project manager or what have you, it's neither here nor there. What is important for people to understand is that the president delegates powers, and the president can also reallocate the delegation of those powers. So the president will provide the details in his reply to the State of the Nation Address debate on the details around the responsibilities of the Minister of Electricity. Safe to say what the president is looking for, as I've said, is a project management sort of approach, somebody that is going to be seized with getting us out of this crisis day in and day out, and somebody that will not have other responsibilities taking up their time, other areas of their work distracting them from this task. So this minister will be seized with one thing and one thing only, that is to accelerate some of the measures, for example, that Rudy related, the work of NECOM, to accelerate the speedy resolution of the current load shedding crisis that we are experiencing. So that in broad terms is what the president is seeking. The details will be provided at the back of the SONA debate when he delivers his response. With respect to that reference of a project manager, I don't think that is in any way demoting the seriousness or the seniority of the role, except to say it's taken from what the president has described, that he's taking on a project management approach with the role. He wants a minister that is going to be hands-on. He wants a minister, as even said, even if it means that minister goes and camps outside of ESCOM or goes and camps outside of any other entity that is involved in getting us out of the current crisis, they will need to do so. So it's a very dedicated focus on getting us out of this crisis. Once we're out of this crisis and we are certain that our grade is stable, the president will then review the relevance or the need of the role. But it's a very targeted role to help us deal with the current crisis. With respect to the presidential jet, normally we prefer these questions to be posed to the Department of Defense because the Air Force is responsible for the air transportation of the president. However, let me just clarify a few issues because a lot of rumors have been doing the rounds and a lot of them false. The president flew to Cape Town on Monday. During takeoff, there was a bird strike on Inkwazi, and that bird strike did not pose any threat to the integrity of the aeroplane, nor did it pose any threat to passengers and crew that were in that aeroplane. I was on that flight. It was a smooth flight. We landed safely in Cape Town. There was no emergency landing. We landed smoothly to the extent that the incident was regarded as being so minor that the crew did not even bother to advise the president of what had happened, because it was a very minor incident that happened during takeoff. Had it been serious, then the crew would have made an appropriate decision to consider or conduct a landing back to Waterkloof Airport. So let's just dispel with that. When the plane was in Cape Town and was now being towed to the hangar where it was going to be fixed, there was a mishap where the tail collided with something, and there's been minor damage on the tail, which is now going to further delay the aeroplane's return to service as a result of that. But it was not a collision with passengers inside. It was a collision post the flight on Monday, and it was one of those unfortunate incidents. But nobody's life was in any danger or threatened in that regard. So we can just dispel with a lot of fake news around this issue, as it has been doing the rounds. I think that's about it, right? Okay. Colleagues, I'm mindful that it's a Sunday. Some of you have favorite shisanyamas to go to. So if you'd like us to continue, we're here. But I think we've been quite comprehensive in both our briefing as well as in our questions. But I'm happy to take more questions and delay your indulgence. Kumashisanyama. Kujo, are there more questions?
Yeah, there's one last question, but I don't know where the person is from, the media house.
Okay, let's hear it.
The question from Tseho Makola is there any specific reason why the president sent his condolences to Turkey and not Syria in the State of the Nation address?
Oh, yes. That was a very unfortunate editing error that we must just take full responsibility for and sincerely apologize for, that we erroneously excluded the mention of Syria. You will have noticed that earlier in the week, at the back of reports of the earthquake in both countries and what was a growing number of fatalities, we did issue a statement from the president that covered both countries. We then followed up that statement with a mention on the State of the Nation address, and again, erroneously, I apologize that we omitted the mention of Syria. And while we are on condolences, we just want to express our condolences to the family of Inkosi Zolake Ndaba of Ntabamhlophe, Inkosi of the Langalibalele local municipality under the Utugela district. We echo the sentiments that have been issued by the Minister of Culture, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, that we wish to join South Africans from across the country in expressing our condolences to the family of Inkosi, the whole traditional sector, communities, the local House of Traditional Leaders, and indeed the entire country. So I thought I'll cover that as well. Kujo, is it a wrap?
Yeah.
Thank you so much, colleagues. We will be in touch as the week progresses. Thank you so much. Okay, Doc. Rodi, thank you so much. You can run off to your favorite Chisanyama on a Sunday.
Which one? He was your honor in terms of the uniform. Yes. so much.